I'm very, very happy and my pleasure to welcome expert host Niklas and his colleague Eric to this session. Niklas is a serial entrepreneur, founder of QOORP, and one of the most experienced people in Sweden when it comes to incentive programs and all the headaches that all of you are going through when it comes to running your company properly and still focusing on your core business. I've known Niklas myself for, I guess, 10 years now. And I'm very happy that you got the time, Niklas, to join us and share your learnings here. So without further ado, leaving the floor to Niklas, and thank you for joining.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, for this kind of introduction. As said, my name is Niklas Rudemo, and I'm the CEO and founder of QOORP. And I have also run a number of other companies, including a company called Virtutech, which was acquired by Intel some 11 years ago, and also being CEO of Gavagai and chairman and board member of several other startups. And so this presentation is divided into two parts. One is regarding challenges regarding incentive programs. And then since I've tried to solve part of that problem myself by building a system that facilitates this, it's going to be a presentation about how you can automate this and make it easier. In order to have an interactive nature, I think it's fine if people ask short questions during the presentation. If you have something that you feel will take longer time, I suggest we keep it to the end of the presentation. But if you want a clarification of something that I say, please go ahead and ask that right away during the presentation. So, challenges when creating incentive programs. As you all know, it's really important to have the right incentives in place. And what I usually tell people when we start talking about that is the best you can do is to get all the people involved in the company when the company starts, so that they are founders, if that is possible. Now, of course, often that is not possible. Because before you have a company in place, you don't really have anything to attach, people to, and so on. So you end up having a situation where people who are important for the company need to have some form of incentives that is not based on them owning shares or them buying shares, because it's too expensive. So then you are, at this time in Sweden, pretty much left to two devices. One is called qualified employee stock options, QESOs, and one is called warrants, or teckningsoptioner. So what we'll start discussing how these play out versus one another, and we'll talk about the various disadvantages and advantages. So QESOs, as you may know, were introduced in 2018 following an investigation done by the Swedish government, where they concluded that the incentive programs available for startups were not good enough. So they have a number of advantages. There's no charge when you start the program. So there's nothing that you need to pay when you start it. And also, when you actually get the shares from the company, then there's a very small amount to pay. And when you sell the underlying shares, it's taxed as capital gains. Sounds wonderful, of course, but there are still some caveats here. So when it comes to the tax as capital gains, that is under the usual rules called fåmansbolagsregler still applies here. So if your company is a fåmansbolag, then you still will end up paying a different tax rate. This is way too complex to get into in the context of this presentation, but I just want to mention that as a caveat, that it's not the panacea. It doesn't solve all problems, but this is usually something that can be dealt with. However, there are a number of disadvantages with QESOs. So the most important one is that there is a 3-year cliff. A 3-year cliff means that if you are leaving the company, or the person is leaving the company before the 3 years are up, all options are lost. Now, that sounds very harsh, and it is. We have a situation in one company we're helping here where we have a founder who would be leaving, or not a founder actually, but a very senior person who would be leaving the company not by his own choosing, but because the company needed to cut down, and he missed the 3-year deadline by 10 days. Unfortunately, that's how it is. That there's no way to get around this. Some people claim that, well, we can formulate the terms such that you can get some form of compensation, but it's really hard to do this in a reasonable way. The reason is the following. You might say that, I mean, let's just look at what the actual problem could be here. Let's say you're trying to hire an external CEO who's going to have a very low salary, let's say 25,000 kronor a year, and then they're going to get shares or options equivalent to 10% of the company. Now, 2.5 years goes by, the company is worth 100 million kronor, so that share is now worth 10 million kronor. And the shareholders start asking themselves, well, now that we're here, we don't really need the services of the CEO. They've already contributed what they're going to contribute. So if we fire them now, we don't have to have them share in the 10 million kronor that they have created in value. And if you do that, then you're legally right. The CEO is then don't get anything, and it's really difficult to create an agreement that is both compliant with tax law and which can handle this situation. The problem is as follows: that you might say that in this situation, it's obvious that you're trying to cheat the CEO and that they should be compensated somehow. But the problem is that it's very difficult to formulate that succinctly in a contract, because you might be in a situation where a person is let go for perfectly good reasons, but for example, that the person isn't performing, or that the company is doing badly and need the money. And if you stipulate that the company needs to make a large payout in such a situation, then you're really creating a lot of problems for the company. So it's really difficult to get around this in a meaningful way. There are ways. We have tried to help some companies solve this by creating a parallel warrant program for this. But this is probably the biggest challenge. And some companies think it's so great that they back away from it. However, if you can ignore this, the terms are really good. It only works for Swedish employees, so you can't give this to consultants, for example. And often, of course, you don't want to take on too many employees to start with. Maybe you can't afford that, so you have consultants, but they are not eligible for QESOs. However, we have marked this with an asterisk, because some people say that it's illegal to give QESOs to non-Swedish employees, and that is not strictly true. What is true is that that Swedish tax law only applies to people who are liable for tax in Sweden. So if you have a person who works, for example, in the UK or in Lithuania and in Egypt, they are subject to British, Lithuanian, and Egyptian tax rules, and they may accept or they may not accept this setup. Now, from what I understand, for example, the UK has a similar scheme, which, as far as we can tell, actually allows Swedish cases to be used. And we have been told by some of our customers who have investigated this, that this is also the case in, for example, Lithuania. So it's difficult to know. You need to know the rules of the tax code of the country involved, but it may be the case that they can actually be issued to non-Swedish employees. But this is not something that we are able to keep track of because it would be too complex to do.
Niklas, quick question.
Yeah.
With Swedish employees, are we talking about Swedish citizens or like under the European?
It does not matter. What matters is if you're tax liable in Sweden or not.
Yeah.
So non-Swedish people who are not Swedish citizens but reside in Sweden would be fine. So if you live in Sweden, then you should be okay. But of course, it does not work for consultants, and we mentioned that before. And also, it does not currently work for board members. However, there is going to be an amendment to the law so that from next year, board members will be included. But funnily enough, only if they are paid. And this is, of course, a little bit of an oxymoron because a lot of board members in startups are not paid at all, or instead they are given options or warrants because the company can't afford that. So that there's a little bit of a contradictory message from the government, but I assume that the rule that board members only are eligible if they are getting paid is that if you didn't have that rule, then it would be very easy to circumvent the intention of the law. And for example, if you want to give it to a consultant, just elect them to the board, and then they would be given as board members. So it's probably because of that this rule is there. There are also some uncertainties regarding how to handle this when the company is acquired. And this is a legally really tricky question. We were possibly the first entity to notice that this uncertainty in the law. It started when we saw the proposal for the law way back in 2017. We were starting to build our system to implement that. We discovered that they had overlooked the fact that there must be a way of actually delivering the shares, and this has implications for both how you handle acquisitions by a third party, but it also has implications for how to ensure that you deliver the share, especially if you plan on having the company being listed. However, the problems regarding acquisitions are largely solved. So basically, the restriction is that you can't, if you issue the QESOs and your company is acquired within the first 3 years, then there are some limitations on when you can have the options triggered. However, there is nothing in the law that says that you can't keep the options even after the company has been acquired, so that you just let them run their course, and after 3 years you get shares in your company, and then you sell them to the acquirer. And of course you should agree on that at the time of the acquisition. So that's largely a solvable problem. The question about being listed is actually somewhat more complex. So the issue here is that due to a poor wording of the law, it was concluded that you can't issue QESOs in the form of warrants. A warrant is a technical term for the promise to someone to be able to acquire shares in the future from a company. And it would be natural that you use this legal mechanism. However, due to poor wording of the law, that was deemed not possible. And so a fix was done in that you would write in your articles or in your shareholders agreement that all the shareholders would agree to issue the shares in the future. However, this does not work when a company is listed, because you can't have a shareholders agreement that is binding on a majority of the shareholders if you list a company, because that's contradictory to the very concept of listing a company. However, about a year ago, there was a court decision by Högsta förvaltningsdomstolen that it is possible to do almost this. So what you can do is that you have a parallel warrant program. So the company issues warrants to itself. And when it's time to deliver the shares to the options holders, they are given warrants, which are then converted into to shares. And this works even for listed companies. And it's also being, since this was a decision by Högsta förvaltningsdomstolen, it's the highest court in Sweden regarding administrative matters. This is binding, so we can be sure of that this actually works. So another limitation is that there are limits on which companies can use it. So they are mainly regarding how old the company is, how many employees it has, and how much revenue it has. And also there are some limitations on which industries are included. So for example, insurance and banking and real estate is excluded. So if you have a company that does innovative things in the field of insurance, then you're unfortunately excluded. And the reason for this is actually quite bizarre. If you read the law, or what's called förarbete to the law, the reasoning behind the law, those who wrote the law actually said that insurance is not an innovative type of business, so therefore they should not be able to have make benefit from this, which of course is a quite an absurd statement to say that you can't make innovation in the field of insurance. But that is what the decision is. So you have to watch out for that, so that you don't operate in a business that is excluded. And also, and this is the tricky part, this exclusion is counted from when at the time of when you issue the shares. So if you start out as something and then move into a field which is forbidden, then unfortunately that ruins your ability to do this with a tax.
Niklas, question: max revenue 80 million. That's annually.
Yes.
Got it.
And that is also going to be raised from next year, so it becomes less of a problem. It's going to be probably 150 million kronor, but I think the decision has not been made yet. So there's a little bit of uncertainty there, and also the max number of employees is probably going to be raised, but not the time limit. Okay, so what about the advantages with warrants? Well, this is quite the opposite of QESOs. It works for all types of companies, so there are no limitations on which companies can issue warrants. It works for the recipient of it can be both companies and employees. And there are well-established rules on how to issue them and how to interpret the rules regarding it. However, there are a number of disadvantages. So the main point tends to be that it tends to be expensive. The problem here is that we're really trying to do something that is contrary. I mean, contrary to the intention of the law. Well, I mean, if you look at why are we doing this in the first place, issuing warrants, it's because we want the participants in this program to get an income that is taxed as capital gains, which is taxed lower than taxed as income. If the tax on income and capital gains were the same, we might as well just pay out a bonus. But the problem is that capital is taxed lower than income. So we want to convert a part of the gain made from being part of this company from income to capital gains. And it's exactly the opposite what the tax authorities try to do. They try to avoid people doing this. So what you're trying to do is really squaring the circle. It's something that really shouldn't be possible to do, but during the past 20 years, we have worked out a de facto standard on how to do it, and that means that the warrants should be priced at market value, which tends to make them expensive. And this market value is calculated using the Black-Scholes formula based on what the company is worth, but also based on something called the volatility. And here we have some legal uncertainties. Volatility means, it basically means how much does the value of the underlying share fluctuate. However, for companies that are not listed, there's no volatility at all because the share price isn't listed, so there's no new price every day. It's not traded. And the problem here is that there is no specified way of finding out what the volatility should be. So it's really a guessing game. And there's no way to get what is called a förhandsbesked. So you can't, in certain cases, you can ask the tax authorities and pay a certain fee, and then you have a question on how is this thing going to be taxed, how should I declare this? And you can get an answer that is binding on part of the Skatteverket. You can't get that when it comes to valuation of warrants. So it is a guessing game. You have to accept that. So there's always going to be tax uncertainty regarding the terms. And also, it's quite complex to implement. And last but not least, it's in the end quite expensive to buy the shares. So let's take an example, a fictitious example. Let's say we have a company that is valued at 100 million kroner, and you want to give a key person, let's say, something corresponding to 5% of the company. Now, let's assume that the company has 1 million shares, so the price per share right now is 100 kroner. In order for the options not to be too expensive, we need to set the strike price fairly high. So let's say that the strike price is going to be 300 million kroner. That means that the person pays a certain amount, and then in 3 or 4 years' time, they get the opportunity to buy 50,000 shares. That is 5% of the company at a certain price. And in this case, we set the price as 300 kroner per share. But that means that the person buying the shares actually have to cough out 50 million kroner. Now, assume that the company is worth, say, 1 billion kroner at the time. So the value has gone up tenfold. Then those 5% at 300 kroner per share are really worth 35 million kroner. But the problem is that in order to get them, you first have to pay 50 million kroner to get the shares. Then you have to sell the shares. Alternatively, you could sell the warrants to somebody who wants to invest in the company, but that somebody would then in turn need to cough up 15 million kronor. And this is a real problem. If you have a company that has come some way, then you're going to get valuations that are fairly high, and that means a lot of money. We had a case in a company that we helped about a year and a half ago, where we had 3 key persons who had been promised roughly 5% of the company, and the company had a valuation of more than 100 million kronor. And in the end, they needed to cough up something like 5 million kronor each, which was not possible. So we had to make a really complex deal where we actually got some investors who were interested in investing in the company, who bought warrants from them and then invested the money in the shares and then sold back some of that, or gave back some of that money to the persons who could then invest in new shares in the company. So that said, it can be quite messy and complex, and you need to plan in advance, because once shares expire, you can't in an easy way, or you can't just ignore the fact that they have an expiry date after which time they are no longer valid. So you need to act on them then and there. However, there are ways of circumventing that by doing what is called a rollover, that you do a new valuation so that the warrant holder pays an additional fee to roll over and hopefully wait for the company to be sold. And that way you can avoid having to do the payout thing. But you need to keep that in mind. That can become a problem. And lastly, sometimes experts give you bad advice. And this has to do with this thing here about the legal uncertainties regarding the pricing. Because there is one surefire way of giving advice that is never wrong, and that is to advise on a price that is too high. Because if you advise on a price that is too high, about volatility that is too high, then the warrant becomes too expensive to use. But it's also so that the tax authorities will not question it. And some advisors see their main purpose as never being faulted by the tax authorities, which of course is contrary to what you want as an entrepreneur. You want to make an attractive warrant program, and those aims can be at odds with each other. So beware of safe valuations, which become too unattractive to really be useful. So conclusions, it's best to include the key people as founders. It's much easier than giving ownership later. If you can, use QESOs when you can, and use warrants if you must. So this is the conclusion of the part of an introduction into incentive programs. Now we're going to talk about how to actually implement it, because that can be a headache too.
Hey, Niklas, we have 15 minutes left, so I think.
Okay, so I'll try to keep this quick. So as an entrepreneur, your goal is to make your business successful, and then you might ask yourself, why are you spending so much time and money on non-business issues? And with non-business issues, we mean corporate necessities. And that's board meetings, shareholder meetings, share issues, and warrants and options for staff, like we talked about in the past. Well, the problem is that this is not just expensive, but also 58% of all registrations of share issues and warrants programs that are submitted to board experts are wrong in some sense. But luckily, it doesn't have to be that way. I was in this situation before, and this is why I started QOORP. And our mission is to help you do the boring stuff easily and correctly and at a reasonable price. And when we started out, we made a couple of observations that much of the work that we're talking about here is of a routine nature, but it's complex. So something that is complex but still routine, that tends to be really boring and therefore error prone. And that is why you get 58% error rate. So this is better suited for machines than for people. And the third observation was that in order to automate this and get things right, you need all the information in one place. And the fourth observation is that a lot of the information you need, instead of asking people for it, you can look it up through APIs and such, or you can calculate it. So these are the 4 design principles we used when we designed this system. So what are the challenges? Well, let's take a look at a warrant program. It seems easy. You create an offer, you offer it to the employees, you sign the agreement, and you're done. But then reality kicks in, and you realize that, oh, you needed a board authorization to do this, and oh, you needed a decision at an extra general meeting, not the annual general meeting because you forgot to do that, in order to get the authorization. And oops, since this was decided not at an annual general meeting, you needed also an auditor statement for this. And this is not the only thing. Actually, there are a lot more steps needed in order to do a full warrant program. In effect, there are between 12 and 15 discrete steps that you need to take care of, depending a little bit on how you do it. And this takes a long time to do. We actually did an experiment to let 2 experienced entrepreneurs who had done this before to create each one a real warrant program that was going to be complete and registered with Bolagsverket. And they had access to Word templates and so on, and it still took them 16 hours each. So this is what it takes if you know what you're doing. And remember, this is the ideal case. You know what you're doing. It was an easy case because it was, in each case, just 1 employee. This is the reason why 58% of all submissions are incorrect. And that is 58%, including those from the law firm. So if you use a law firm, you should expect there to be a problem and that you have to pay for the errors that they...
Niklas, quick question. Why on earth are the law firms getting this wrong?
Well, I'll explain that, the type of errors that occur, because they are quite trivial, but given the workflow at Bolagsverket, they tend to be very time consuming to fix. So if we do this in QOORP, we have streamlined the process, so it takes approximately 30 minutes, and it's correct the first time around. Of course, you can, if you try, you can screw it up, but usually it's correct. And there are no extra legal fees for this. The reason we can get it right, is that we have access to all the information. So we look up companies, we extract all the data that is available on them from Bolagsverket and from other sources. So we know when they were founded, we know who the board members are, we know what share capital they have. So there's much less fuss. We have integrated digital signatures, and of course we can look up personnummer and such details, so we get that right the first time around. And we've also built pedagogical steppers that tells you what to do in each instance. And if you need, there is extra information that tells you how to do things. And you asked why do law firms get it wrong? Well, so here's an example. You start out doing a warrant program that is for 48 months, 4 years. That means that you have the right to buy shares 4 years from now. So, and that dates, the starting date and the end date when you can buy shares is something that goes in 3 places. It goes into the decision, it goes into the terms of the warrant program, and it goes into the registration form that you send in. So 3 places. Now let's assume that you change it to 3 years because you decided to do that in order to reduce the cost. Then you need to make those changes, those dates, in 3 different places. But let's say that you forgot to do it in 1 place. Then the submission is incorrect, and that is a typical case where you get something wrong. Now, QOORP is smarter than that because it will warn you and say, it keeps track of all the ingoing information and what needs to be updated. So it will tell you, you'll get a red sign saying that this information is outdated, you need to generate a new document here. And of course, we generate the whole documentation in one go, and including the registration form that you need to submit to Bolagsverket. And how are we doing time-wise now?
We have 9 minutes left.
Okay, so I'll see if I can do you see my screen now?
Can we, before, I'm guessing you're jumping into a demo now?
Yes.
Before we do that, we got a question from Frederick regarding how you set up warrants when you have employees in many different countries. What would be your recommendation?
Okay, so the question is how do we get how do we handle employees in many different countries? Well, the problem here tends to be, I mean, the main problem here is that is this legal in all jurisdictions? And the short answer is we don't know. There's no way for us to, at a reasonable expense, keep track of the terms for warrant programs in different countries. However, warrants are, as we do them in Sweden, are priced at what is supposed to be a market rate using the Black-Scholes formula, which is the standard pricing mechanism for warrants. So in theory, they are priced at market rates, which should, under any reasonable law, make them possible to use in other countries. So I think it's fairly safe to assume that they work. If you really need to know, then you need to look that up for that particular country. But I think it's generally fairly safe to assume that it works.
Okay, so then your recommendation is that, but just to clarify, the services, the QOORP solution is for Sweden only, right?
It's for Swedish companies only. We cannot create a warrant program for a company domiciled not in Sweden, but we do warrant programs for companies that are for employees that are outside of Sweden. We do that quite often.
Yep. Okay. So, but in other words, if there's any uncertainties, like consult a legal advisor, I guess.
Well, yes, and that is always the case. I mean, I mean, so one thing here is your approach to risk. Some people say that we can't accept any risk at all. We need to have all the T's crossed and the I's dotted. The problem with that is that there are a lot of risks in running a business, and getting all esoteric hypothetical tax issues solved may not be the greatest risk. I mean, you have to see what is. Let's say you have a situation where you have a person in say Romania getting warrants that corresponds to 1% or 1/10% of a company that is worth 50 million kronor. That is just too little money to worry about, even if the tax consequences of that would be unreasonable. It's not going to wreck your company. I mean, it's highly unlikely that it's going to wreck your company.
Got it. So always keeping track on.
Well, I mean, yeah, this is the problem. This is the problem. If you really want to investigate everything to the core, then you're going to ruin yourself in legal expense because it's too expensive.
Got it. Okay.
We have 5 minutes left, and then we have to jump into the Q&A.
Yep.
Okay. So let's see if we can do a little bit of a demo now. And I have prepared some stuff here. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, it's very small though. At least for.
Is it big enough now?
Yep.
Okay.
At least for me.
So so here we have.
For me too.
Good. So this is from our testing system. So anything that I present here is not the data that is recorded at Bolagsverket is correct, but everything else that we have done as input is fake. So we'll just start doing a warrant program just to give you an idea of how quickly or how it works. We may not be able to quite finish it, but we'll start with this company called Gavagai, and we'll create a new warrant program, and the system will say, okay, welcome here. Here's an introductory video that tells you about it. Let's get going right away, and we call this test 4. And here we see that the system knows that we can use an authorization, and it knows that there is an authorization available, which is registered with Bolagsverket, so we don't need to worry about that. We can create a meeting, a board meeting that makes the decision, or we can look at, do we have any board meetings that to which we can connect it? And there is one here, so let's just connect it to that one. And then we set a start date, and let's set it starting from today. It's 4 years. And we use the newest share issue for the company as the basis of evaluation. And we're going to see how that works out. It turns out that the company issued shares last year at 22 kronor per share. So we set the strike price at 44 kronor, and we'll add a fictitious person here as a recipient of these warrants, and this person is going to get 50,000 warrants. So we see, okay, that corresponds to 0.2% of the shares, and we have a volatility of 30% to start with. And now we get to the playground. We can see, okay, so these warrants would cost this person 53,980 kronor, and there's a strike price of 2.2 million. Here is the interesting part where we can start playing around and saying, well, maybe 53,000 kronor is a little bit too much. So we are willing to accept a slightly higher tax risk by reducing the volatility, and maybe, and you can immediately see that the warrant price goes down now. Maybe we can raise the strike price and further get the price down, and so on. We can play around with what we think works. When we're done, we just save this and go to the payment terms. We can add a bank account for where Jane Doe should pay for her warrants if we want to that. We get a summary of the important dates when the warrants have to be paid for, and when you can subscribe for shares. And then we can see if we should have the documents in Swedish only or in English and Swedish. And we see who will be signing on behalf of the company and who is signing the form. And then we get a summary. And then we get to the question about the board statement that we talked about before. And let's just skip this part because it doesn't add that much value. Now we can create all the documents for digital signing. So this was a super fast overview of what you need to do in order to do that. But basically those were the steps. And if we want to go back and now we would create the documents. And if we want to go back and see change something, then we would go back here to the pricing page, for example, and then we could change something here. The system would mark the documents as being incorrect, and then we would need to we would be reminded of to regenerate them again, and we would go on here. So basically, everything you need to do here is included in the system, and you have guides for things like this for warrants, for qualified employee stock options, for doing share issues, for generally holding shareholder meetings and so on, and also of course for keeping the share register. So it's a handy all-in-one tool for everything that relates to corporate necessities. And let's see if I can get back to the presentation here now.
We actually just ran out of time.
Okay. So
We should...
let me just say that what we do have an offer for SUP46 companies is that you can use the system with a 25% discount the first year, and if you use the promo code SUP46, then we know it's you. And well, you can pay for the service on a yearly or a monthly basis. That's basically, yeah. And then of course, if you want to try it out, you just log into our site, and since we use Bank ID, you don't really need to pre-register anything. You just log in.
Really good stuff. Niklas, do you have, can you comment on how much manual things do I have to do elsewhere to Bolagsverket or Skatteverket if I'm using QOORP for those purposes?
And I'm not sure I fully understand the question.
Do you have to do anything manually with Bolagsverket when I'm doing those things, or can I do everything through QOORP?
Yes, you do need to do some things manually, and this is very unfortunate because there's a law, Aktiebolagslagen, that says that you should be able to use digital signatures for everything, including the subscription form. The problem is that Bolagsverket refuses to follow the law. So you actually, when you have everything done, you have everybody has signed the documents digitally, you have to print it all out and send it in by mail.
Got it.
That's very frustrating, but that's how it works.
But at least all the material is done, at least.
Yeah.
In order for
and we
them to receive.
We try to keep Bolagsverket's feet to the fire and make them follow the law. And there is actually a theoretical way of doing it all digitally, but it requires us to use a digital signature solution, which is not very common in Sweden. But there is actually a company called Zealcore or ZealID, ZEALID, and if you use them, they have a higher level of certification than Bank ID has. So actually, Bolagsverket is not allowed to refuse that, but it's not common enough that we have implemented that support for that in our system yet. But we would love to do that because that way we could do it all digitally. And
Niklas, really appreciate that. Really helpful. Good to see demonstration. I hope the participant really enjoyed and really actually understood what it means to do it through QOORP. Short Q&A.
Can I launch the feedback questions first?
Go for it.
Okay.
Go for it.
So it's 3 questions just for us to kind of get some feedback and see how well we're doing. And then with the last question, if you have any other suggestions regarding a topic you would like to hear about, just send it in the chat and we'll keep it in mind. Thanks,
Kat. While you launch the survey, am I launching it or you?
I am. It's
awesome. Good. So while you respond to that, please everyone respond so we know how we can improve and what to do. Feel free to shoot questions to Niklas. Anything else that pops up? Yeah, Steven, feel free to unmute and introduce yourself and ask.
So, I mean, we've been talking to folks in various parts of the world, you know, kind of US, Israel, you know, whatever, all over the place in terms of advisory board stuff. And, you know, typically those sort of things, like whatever, are based on equity. Like whatever, is the only way to solve that in like whatever warrants or how?
Well, I mean, again, this is each country has its own set of rules, but so if you want a detailed answer, then you really have to dig into each country's specific rules. Some countries have specific rules that makes it easier, but as a general rule, I would say warrants is the best thing. But then you also have to think about what is the risk that you're running by, for example, selling shares directly to an advisor at below market rate. I mean, what is the risk that you're running in terms of this actually being discovered, and what are the consequences if that is the case? So in many places, for example, I talked to one of our customers who ran business in Egypt, and they and I asked them, have they investigated this? And they said, well, the way the Egyptian authorities operate is that if you go to them and say, I made this profit and I want to pay tax on this, then they say, fine, just pay it, and no further questions will be asked. They will just happy to get the money. So, and I expect that to be the case in many cases, but if you really want to know, you need to investigate that further. I mean, if it's an advisor to whom you're going to give a significant ownership share that is of a significant value, then you probably need to investigate that a little bit more.
And just out of curiosity, like, is this more? This seems or feels far more complicated here than it does in other jurisdictions, or is it just me?
I think that every jurisdiction has a set of rules on how you do things. I mean, what we did was that we described all the details in minutely how things are done, and then you get to the nitty-gritty of it, and it's perhaps seems more complicated than if you would. I mean, if you would ask a US person, how is this done in the US? And said, oh, you just issue shares, or you do this and that. And then they forget to tell you, yeah, you pay a lawyer $20,000 and then they do it all for you. And so maybe it's more complicated than they will tell you, because they don't explain all the details of it.
No, but I mean, if you're trying to build a global business and you have people in different places in the world and all that sort of stuff, it seems like a very insular, a Swedish solution to a Swedish problem, as opposed to a global company type problem. Like the QESO bit, like since it always
I mean, the QESO bit is a Swedish solution to a Swedish problem, obviously. But that's what we have to use to operate. So QESOs are not that applicable for the rest of the world. But I mean, that they are very attractive to people who are liable for tax in Sweden. So that's why it is important for Swedish purposes. But that doesn't mean that it's uninteresting to use, even if you have. I mean, there's nothing prohibiting you from having both a QESO program and a warrant program, for example.
It seems like the way it has to be. Okay.
Yeah. So we got a question about advice, or what was that? That was you.
That was me. I was.
Yep.
Yeah.
Niklas, do you want to mention something? If there's no other question popping in, we ran out of time. Brief comment on when you're issuing new shares, like which is obviously something startups are doing a lot when they want to get some external funding. Is there something you want to share in terms of how to do that properly and fast through QOORP?
Yeah, well, I mean, we do have a system for doing that, and what I can relate is that if you do it properly and you keep, then it is not that difficult. What is difficult if you try to rush it, you do something, then you do another share issue before you have registered the next thing, and then you realize that you have to do a share split before you do the next thing, and then you get into a complete garble of things, and that's when the wheels tend to come off. And I'm actually helping out a company that is in this situation right now, and I think they have I think they have 6 share issues that are in the process of being registered. And if you do it that way and you try to do it manually at first, then the complexity grows exponentially and it becomes almost insurmountable.
So keep it simple, make it right from the beginning.
Do the registration as fast as possible, because otherwise things can really escalate, and you run into these sorts of problems that, oh, you forgot to register it within the time limit, which is 6 months, and then you do did a crowdfunding round, and then you have to have an agreement from everybody who participated that they will stand by their share. It gets enormous.
So, totally get it. Sorry to interrupt. We need to end conversation right there. I want to respect the time of the founders as well. Niklas, really appreciate you taking time and sharing your experience and knowledge with the community. As you know, this is recorded. We'll share it afterwards. Everyone's get the deck, and you can get access to QOORP through QOORP.se, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome.
And you just log in and you enter SUP46 as the promo code, and then you
awesome. Or if you forgot, you can also ask Kat to get the promo code. Thanks everyone. See you guys soon, and welcome back from summer. I'll jump into another conversation with Niklas on the fireside chat in a separate forum. If you guys want to follow us on social, feel free to do so. Good. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.